Mira's matchup chart. Let's do it. You guys have been asking for this one for a while, so let's cover this, shall we? Alright, first course of action, we have Jago. In some ways, I do feel like Mira does well against Jago, but all you really got to do as Jago is kind of just be patient early on, because bats will zone you out for the most part, and she can find a lot of openings off of throwing bats at you. And I do feel like it's annoying at first, but once he gets meter, having access to stuff like Shadow Endokuken and Shadow Wind Kicking through bats in neutral is really strong. I think he has a lot of ways to cover her mist on Wake Up, and I think his neutral against her is fine. The mobility is a little annoying, but as long as you're patient with Jago, I don't see her giving him any disadvantages. I think this matchup is pretty even. Next course of action is Sabrewulf. I do think that she has a slight advantage in this matchup due to her mobility. I don't think she's necessarily good at zoning Wolf, because Slide is just outrageous against zoning. I don't necessarily like using Sabrewulf against Mira. You can pressure her pretty well, and I think having access to Eclipse is really good on her Oki, but it's just an annoying... She's so slippery. That's the problem, right? She's just so slippery. Eclipse is very good at catching her out of the air, but you know, she can bait the Eclipse with her mist if she's air dashing at him, so it's just a big mind game. It's annoying. Bats lock down Wolf really well, and she can pressure him a lot better than he can pressure her, in my opinion. So I'm gonna have to say I think this matchup is slightly favoring Mira. It's not impossible, but I do think she has the upper hand in that matchup. Alright, Glacius. I think this one's even. It's a weird one. I don't really think that Glacius loses to Mira. You would think having a big floaty jump and him being super tall, she would be very annoying for him, but I don't know, man. Glacius has a hard time losing to a lot of people. I feel like he's just such a strong character. Hail is annoying for Mira. You know, it's very good at controlling the space in front of her, so it can definitely stop her approach. I think that he has a good answer to a lot of her stuff with just Cold Shoulder. Like, you can Cold Shoulder to interrupt, like, bats being called out after, like, a combo breaker. It's pretty nuts. I think this character is just really strong overall. I don't think Mira necessarily loses either. I think they just kind of beat the crap out of each other, and it's a pretty fair fight. Alright, Chief Thunder, very easy. One of her easiest matchups in the entire matchup chart. She has the upper hand in zoning. She has the upper hand in mobility. She gets out of all of his mix-ups with mist, and you can just get the hell out of there. Get out of dodge. You don't really ever have to deal with whatever Thunder is doing to you. All the low overhead throw mix-ups don't really exist against Mira because she's just so slippery. And then the neutral is really hard for Thunder too, because she kind of out-footsies him in neutral too. Standing medium punch is a hell of a button against Thunder, and standing heavy punch is really good too. Like, if you ever command grab Thunder, your standing heavy punch beats everything with the exception of Shadow DP. So you can just pressure the crap out of Thunder too if you are up close. She really doesn't have many situations where it's like really scary to fight Thunder, in my opinion. I think it's one of her easiest matchups overall. Alright, up next we have Shadow Jago. I think Shadow Jago actually kind of doesn't do all that great against Mira. I'm going to be honest. I actually would rather use Jago, personally. His DP is worse in this matchup because it's just straight up. You don't have that horizontal arc to it, so she can pressure his Wake Up for free a lot of the time with standing medium punch, especially like after like a damage ender that keeps her kind of spaced out. She can just stay at a distance and pressure him for free. If he backdashes, it's like, okay, well, you're full screen and Mira's full screen, and she doesn't really care about that. He has to like kind of zone her in a way, like set up air fireballs and anti-air fireballs, but it doesn't really work because her mobility is just so crazy, and locking down Shadow Jago with bats is really, really annoying for Shago. I think she wins the footsie war. She doesn't care about his zoning, and she pressures the crap out of him. I don't think his Wake Up is very good against her. I think the Shago has to be super patient in this matchup, which I don't think Shago really truly excels in. I think being patient with Shago is strong, but you gotta kind of go nuts sometimes, and she kind of stops him from going nuts. Sadira, I think, is also a winning matchup for Mira. Slightly. It might even be like 5.5, but I think the biggest reason that Mira does well against Sadira is having a better Wake Up option. Spread all together, just, I mean, mist is just crazy. And not really having to hold a lot of the Sadira mix, you know? Her defense is good because of that. The biggest takeaway for me in this matchup is heavy bats. So what you do is, if you're Mira against Sadira, you just call heavy bats, I mean, she's going to be trying to get in on you, right? So you establish your space, and once you get that space, you call heavy bats, and then what's Sadira going to do? She has to wait. You know, if she's flying around the screen, she's going to get hit out of the air, she's going to hit the ground, and then you get to pressure her for free because her wake-ups just suck. So you get free pressure off of stuff like heavy bats, and if you want to get your health back with a command grab, the health that you spent on the bats or on an air dash or something, you're +4 and you can pressure her for free. So she just pressures Sadira way better than Sadira pressures her. Bats are really annoying for Sadira. Another thing I like in this matchup is if a Sadira is jumping towards you, kind of coming at an angle like this, you can drill under, you can do light drill and recover, and by the time Sadira hits the ground, you can usually trip guard her. And I find that to be a very solid strategy against her. That happens to work for me like 9 times out of 10. It's actually super consistent. I would say like 99 times out of 100. Just drill under her and get her on the other side. It's pretty easy. I like that matchup for Mira. Alright, Orchid is going to be our first losing matchup on this list. I think Orchid's kind of annoying. Her walk speed's really good. I think her footsie tools are really good against Mira. Having safe special moves I think is strong against Mira. And Each Nissan and Flick Black do a good job of that. Mira can't really punish stuff like Each Nissan or medium or light Flick Black. It's kind of annoying. And then having stuff like, you know, stand medium punch, stand heavy punch, and neutral can give Mira a hard time in a lot of cases. I also think what Mira does is kind of hard to do against Orchid because she can slide under bats, she can sweep under bats. Grenade pressure is a real thing. I think she just pressures Mira's wake up well. I think she deals with miss well. You know, you can just meaty her with something fast like a light and then just anti-air her with like Crouch Fierce and get a grenade out too. It's a pretty easy matchup from what I've seen. I don't really like this matchup at all. I used to think it was even. I played Nate in it. He just absolutely wrecked me. I don't think this is a winning matchup for her at all. However, I do like Spinal as a winning matchup here in the 6-4 category. Mira does pretty well against Spinal. She locks down his wake-up options pretty well. He can power devour the bats, but if she can get the bats out in time for him to power devour him, she could usually also punish him because he's in recovery, absorbing all the bats, and she could usually hit him for free. So it will give him his resource, but you get a free punish. So I think it's like a pretty good trade in her favor. She locks down his wake-up options very well. Having a big, huge hitbox on that jump heavy kick cross-up is really annoying for Spinal to deal with. I think that's really, really good. His defense is super lacking. And I really feel like Mira just pressures the crap out of him. That's really what it comes down to. You know, pressure him with stuff like crouching medium punch. And then you're safe. He teleports away. You could usually just throw him out of it. So she does pretty well against Spinal. I like her against the Bone Man. All right, here's the controversial one, Fulgore. I still, to this day, I don't really like fighting Mira as Fulgore. If I ever see a Fulgore player, I'm just like, Mira's not a bad pick. Early on, when he doesn't have pips, it's very annoying to deal with her. She's all over the screen, and it's like the hardest thing to control is characters that are all over the place. Like a good Sadira, a good Mira, a good Rash, of course. Characters like Omen. I think they do well against Fulgore. I think that's the strat, is early on be as annoying as possible. Don't let him get his pips early and just pressure the crap out of him. It's hard for him to deal with the bats if she stays in like a sweet spot range. Kind of like stand medium punch, stand heavy kick range into bats, and Fulgore kind of just has to hold that. If he doesn't have meter, she can pressure the crap out of him. She doesn't have to really worry about his mix because of mist, so she could just get away from all that stuff and reestablish herself with stuff like bats. So he's going to be spending his spin speed on mix, and it just doesn't work. You kind of have to do really dry pressure with Fulgore, like stuff like crouching light punch and stand light kick into frame traps, like not your usual Fulgore blender stuff. You have to tone it down a lot because she just deals really well with all of the stuff that's normally considered busted. Very interesting. She pressures him well, she deals with his pressure well, and I think she has a pretty good advantage in the neutral. Blade dash is a little annoying, but other than that, I think Mira has a really good time against Fulgore. Another big winning matchup here for Mira is TJ combo. Once upon a time, I thought this matchup was very easy. However, Devil pretty consistently beats me in this matchup despite it being bad for TJ. I think it is bad for TJ. I think Devil just literally outplays me every time we play it. She pressures the crap out of him. Her mobility is really good against TJ. It's very similar to the Sabrewulf matchup. I just haven't found a Sabrewulf that fights it as well as Devil does with TJ. So I think it's exactly the same matchup. You know, he's got the power line. Wolf has the run. He could roll through the bats, just like Wolf can slide through them. Roll's probably better overall, just because, you know, it's not as much of a commitment. And I really just feel like he has a hard time dealing with her when she's in the air, just like Sabrewulf. You know, he's got that down-up uppercut, just like the Eclipse. The Eclipse isn't as, his uppercut isn't as good as the Eclipse, but I do feel like it's viable in some situations. Mira has a pretty good time against TJ too. I think the sister battle is pretty annoying. I personally don't like fighting Maya as Mira. I think safe dagger pressure against Mira is a pretty good way to lock her down, especially if you do stuff like jump dagger as a meaty. Just misting away from that is usually not a good idea because she can pretty much just anti-air you on reaction every single time. Having stuff like crouching heavy punch as a tool in neutral is really good. Mira has a hard time just like instant air dashing at at Maya. Maya can control the space that Mira usually contests pretty well. She can roll through the bats just with her forward dash in a lot of situations, and her air mobility is pretty much just as good as Mira's, but doesn't really cost any health. I always found this matchup annoying. I was always bad against it whenever I fought Z-Train. I'm just not a fan of this matchup. I don't know. I guess Maya's the better sister after all. Conra's somewhere in the middle here. I don't think this matchup is bad for Mira. I think a lot of Conra players like this matchup, but I do think that it's pretty even overall. If she gets started early, you know, momentum is just in her favor at all times. If she never lets him get sand, if she never lets him get established and she doesn't get cursed, it's pretty much fine. However, if he gets started early, it becomes difficult for her too, because it's hard to advance with Mira. But you have stuff like Mist, and you can bait an anti-air and punish it by air dashing at him and then misting at the right time and coming down with a punish. So it's really not that bad. There's a lot of mind games in this matchup, and it is super momentum heavy, so I think it's a perfect 5-5. I don't think that Conra beats Mira, and I don't think that Mira beats Conra. I think it's pretty 50-50. Another matchup I think is relatively even here is Riptor. I think Riptor's a pretty good pick for Mira personally, but I don't think she beats her. I think having run back tail is really good against Mira because it stops a lot of her air shenanigans, but Mira can also blow Riptor up for like abusing the run back tail because Mira has such great ways to catch backdash. You can catch it late with stuff like standing heavy punch or back heavy punch, or you could just chase it down with Trefine. You just use the drill and it'll stop all forms of her survival run, so she just has a hard time doing it sometimes. But she can also use Predator Stance really well in this matchup. She could use the Predator Stance to go underneath the bats and just doesn't have to deal with them sometimes. I think it's also pretty easy for Riptor to pressure Mira once she gets started. She has great plus frames just like Wolf, but I think the anti-air options are a little bit better. I think she's able to cover the space that Mira usually contests pretty well. Her tail is pretty good. Jump heavy kick is really good as an air-to-air. On the read that she might just instant air dash, you just cover that space right in front of you. It's pretty annoying, but I don't think Mira really loses it, but neither does Riptor. I think it's another straight down the middle matchup. Don't even have to think about this one. I think this is the second worst matchup in the game. Everything that Mira does, Omen does better. He doesn't have her damage output, but she can't get the damage in this matchup. There's no way. Bats go away when Mira gets hit, and Rashikukens do not. He can essentially throw them out for free, and it doesn't matter. He can fly around the screen and cancel out of it at any time without any penalty. She has to spend her health to fly around the screen. His teleport costs 1 bar of meter. Every ender that he has builds him meter, and he builds the meter that he gets the fastest in the game. He has the best battery enders, and he has multiple battery enders. This character builds the most meter in the game. She has to spend her health to use that same teleport, and it's just not as good. You can kind of use his as a mix-up tool at any point. She can use it, but it's super risky in this matchup. She just has a hard time dealing with the crossover stuff that he does too, because her anti-airs are very lacking, and this character just has air superiority in every way. It's like super hard for Mira to deal with Omen's pressure. Like, you can miss that as some stuff, but it's almost never worth it because he usually just has the Orda shield ready to go, and he could just clip you out of the air every single time. He wins the footsie war too. His footsies are incredible. She just has really no good advantage in this matchup. I think it's the second worst matchup in the game. I think this matchup is right behind Kim Woo versus Aganos. This matchup is bad. This is very bad. Aganos, I think, is a tough one. Not nearly as bad as Omen, but I do think Aganos has the upper hand. I think it wouldn't be as bad if he didn't start out with Chunks, but that's not realistic. That's not the game we play. He starts out with Chunks. She can strip them off kind of well in some situations, but more often than not, it's bait, and he can usually trip guard her and punish her for some weird reason. He controls the space around her really well. If he puts the wall behind her, She just doesn't have great options. Payload is unusually really good at keeping Mira out, and it's hard for her to walk forward. Her walk speed isn't very good, and she kind of has to rely on instant air dashing in a lot of situations. And Aganos, as long as he's patient, really doesn't let her get started. It's very annoying. His neutral just, I mean, you know, he's a top 5 character for a reason. Some will argue he might even be the best in the game, but close to it besides Rash. But yeah, he gives her a hard time. He's very, very annoying to deal with as Mira. I don't like the Aganos matchup. Hisako is another even one. She's kind of small, so it's sometimes awkward trying to hit her with like cross-ups and stuff like that. So usually you like go right over her, and it's like, wow, she's so tiny. But also, there's a big mind game with a lot of that stuff, because what's Hisako's like biggest strength against anti-airing is her parry, right? It's very hard for her to swap Mira out of the air with stuff like crouching medium punch or crouching heavy punch, so she's going to be relying on the parry a lot. You could use that as bait. You know, if you condition somebody with instant air dashes and they start parrying your jump heavy kick or your jump heavy punch, then you could just empty instant air dash and get a free punish every time they parry. So there's a big mind game there. Hisako deals with bats pretty well in the neutral. She doesn't really care about the bats. She could just dash right under them. However, I do feel like if you ever get a throw or a Trifine Ender, using the medium bats locks down Hisako really well. I've always felt like that's been Hisako's biggest weakness, is projectile lockdown. She really only has Shadow Ores for that, and you can bait that very easily in this matchup. I do think her neutral's very good against Mira. She outfootsies her with stuff like stand medium punch and stand heavy punch and sweep. But on the other hand, Mira has great buttons too, stuff like stand heavy kick and stand medium punch. The mobility is pretty even, believe it or not, because of Hisako's forward dash. She's usually the one chasing Mira. Mira kind of wants to space Hisako out in this matchup. It's very interesting. There's a really weird dynamic between these two that doesn't exist in any other matchup in this game. And I kind of like it. I think this matchup's very fun. And again, right down the middle. Cinder's really tough. I have Cinder as a 6-4 matchup. I might even put him over Aganos, honestly. This matchup's tough. Bombs are very annoying for Mira. Trailblazer is great for keeping Mira out of the air, and Mira has a hard time anti-airing, as you know. This matchup I used to think was in the same category as Omen, and it might be, but I do find that I have an easier time with Cinder players than I do Omen players. I feel like I at least have a chance against a Cinder. I've never ever felt like I've ever had a chance against Omen. That matchup is just doo-doo. Cinder, just really annoying to deal with. The Fire Flash, anti-air, one of the best ways to deal with Mira. She can safe jump him in certain situations, but usually if she's going for a specific safe jump setup, it's usually very easy to block, and he just kind of just holds it, and he's like, whatever. You know, I also have a DP if you try to follow it up, or I can throw you, and we all know that Cinder gets quite a bit off of his throws. Just really annoying. Inferno is actually pretty good at against Mira, especially when it's fired up. He can do that and just kind of keep her out with that. Pyro Bombs are annoying. And then if he ever sees her throw bats out, he could throw the Pyro Bomb and blow up the Pyro Bomb, and it gets rid of all the bats and it hits her. It's an annoying matchup. She gets kept out by Cinder very well. He does a great job at zoning her, and I don't like it. I think Kim Woo's a 5-5. I used to believe that this matchup was losing, but Mira actually has to play like a solid footsie game against Kim Woo. Like if you play nutty against Kim Woo with like instant air dashes and stuff like that, like Sonic Dolphin used to blow me up in this matchup, but the problem was I was just being an idiot. I was just playing super unsafe, super nutty, and just air dashing all over the place and throwing bats at a character that can either parry them or reflect them. Not good. You don't want to do that stuff. You want to play some honest nooch with Kim Woo, because I think that Mira can. It's tough because you have to be patient because your walk speed isn't nearly as good as Kim's, but you do have the buttons to deal with her neutral. Stand medium kick is good. Stand medium punch. Stand light kick is a phenomenal tool in this matchup. 5 frames, and it outranges just about any other light button. It's like super good. So I do feel like as long as you're playing patient, you can deal with Kim Woo. The parry is annoying, but I don't think she beats Mira flat out just because of it. I think Mira just has to play super solid in this matchup, and I don't really think she loses it. Tusk is another pretty even one. I've played this matchup a bunch with Latalis. It's a lore battle. I don't think this matchup is favored on either side. I think it's straight down the middle. Deflect and, crouching heavy punch is really good at getting Mira out of the air. Both of these characters crap a ton of damage. He can get around bats really well with the dash, the Immortal Spirit. However, she can also bait him for using that and punish him. So it's just everything that each character has, there's like a mind game behind. There's no direct counter to anything, and there's no like absolute stop sign. Each character usually has like an answer for something. It's a really fun matchup. One of my favorite. I like fighting Tusk with Mira. This matchup is pretty good. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. Up next, we got CEO of Ultratech, Miss ARIA here. I really feel like if ARIA makes a mistake, it's bad. But if she plays perfectly, which on paper can happen, she, I think, does well against Mira. I think she can beat her. I think the biggest takeaway in this matchup, the most annoying thing for Mira is the assists. So as long as she just doesn't lose a life bar, the assists are really annoying for Mira to deal with. Also, being able to sniper out of the air with jump medium kick and jump heavy kick. Jump heavy kick is 5 frames. She has some of the best air-to-air options for Mira, period. If you start out in booster body and you just camp with base assist and jump medium kick, Mira has a very, very difficult time advancing. I think that's one of the easiest ways to beat Mira. I played this matchup quite a while back with Luna, and she was kind of going crazy at first, and I was just like, oh, I'm just going to eat this up. And then she started playing patient and you know, spamming the jump medium kick, holding the base assist, using the blade body when I got close, and then was able to easily pressure me. And I was like, oh god, this is annoying. I do think that Mira has a good time with footsies against ARIA, but Shotgun Blitz is so annoying. It has so much priority, and it can go over the drill. So I don't really like this matchup at all, personally. I think if you get the hit, it can be fun, because one counterbreaker eliminates any of her bodies. You can actually do crazy damage against ARIA with Mira, but so does everybody, really. I mean, ARIA just has to play patient and play perfect and not lock out. Mira has a hard time with this matchup if she plays perfect. Arbiter is another 5-5. Again, very similar to the Tusk matchup in my opinion. I don't think either one of these characters has the upper hand. Overshield is good against stuff like bats, but she could also shred the overshield very easily if he does absorb the bats. I think being able to fly in front of his face is really, really good, because I think his anti-air options are kind of whack. But I also feel like he's very good at controlling her on the ground. Stand medium punch is a great button against Mira. Stand fierce is also fantastic, and both can be used to kind of anti-air her if she's air dashing her way in. I don't really feel like either character loses this matchup either. I think they pressure each other fine. Mira is definitely harder to block, and he's a big body, so it makes it worse. She gets some cross-ups on him that she doesn't get on a lot of other characters in the cast. Like, she gets big body cross-ups, like against Aganos and Gargos, but other than that, I don't think this matchup is bad for Arbiter at all. Also, Carbine. Carbine is very annoying. I hate anti-air Carbine in this matchup, and then jump back gun. Oh boy. I'm getting Sonic Dolphin flashbacks again. Yeah, this matchup's pretty even. I think it's fine. There's no reason why one would beat the other. Rash is stupid. I hate Rash just as much as you guys. We just have to accept the fact that he's in the game. God, Wicked Tongue, Boot. She can't do anything against him in neutral as long as he's using the right buttons at the right times and he's not playing like an idiot. Mira has a hard time. You know, he can eat the bats. He just rushes her down super well. He covers the missed option super well because of Boot. Wrecking Ball is really annoying to deal with. She can't really mist away from anything. It's very similar to the Omen matchup. He just controls just about every single situation. He just excels everywhere on the screen, and she doesn't. It's super bad. I hate this matchup. Another matchup I don't like is Gargos. I think Gargos is annoying. She does get some pretty nasty cross-ups on him because of how tall he is, but his neutral is way better. I think having crouching medium punch against her is really good. 6-frame button that's +1. She has a hard time challenging that. She doesn't have a 6-framer, so she's forced to try to contest with stand light kick, and she loses a lot of situations, unfortunately, on the ground against this character. He has the 4 jumps, and his mobility is arguably better than hers because he gets to fly around for free and she doesn't. He controls the airspace better. He can anti-air her very well with a very premeditated crouching heavy punch or with standing heavy kick. And then Portal Punch is really annoying against Mira. She can't ever call bats from a distance. She has a really hard time getting in on his zoning. And if the minions get called out, GG's, bro. That's so hard. If minions were a constant, kind of like Aganos' chunks, I would honestly put him down here. I think that matchup would be super bad. It does eventually turn into that if he gets the meter and he gets started. She has to rush him down super early and keep the pressure up, but I don't know, man. It's easier said than done. His mobility keeps him very annoying in that matchup. I hate fighting Gargos with Mira. Not one of my favorite matchups at all. General RAAM, I think, is very easy. I think you could control every single situation pretty well. He doesn't really get in ever. Light bats are super annoying for RAAM. Like, she can actually anti-air this character. He's one of the few exceptions where she can actually anti-air pretty well with stuff into, like, you know, she can anti-air with, like, Crouch Fierce into bats, or Crouch Fierce into, I don't know, drill for extra damage, or recap him. I don't know. He just never gets in this matchup. If RAAM gets in on you and you're playing Mira, you're doing something terribly wrong. You have to work on your mobility. This character just has no real advantages against Mira. Mist is pretty good overall. If he corners her, he can kind of pressure her well and then use Krill Shield to stop her from misting away, but you gotta play perfectly to even get there. Mira should never really lose this matchup, in my opinion. I think Eyedol's another fun matchup. She has to kind of do what everybody else has to do and take turns depending on what form he's in. If he's in the warrior form, she can zone him pretty well with mobility, like air dashing away and calling bats. And then if he's in the mage form, you get to rush him down really well too. But he has answers for everything too. His anti-airs are fantastic. His space control in mage is really, really good. And, you know, she has to deal with his instinct just like everybody else does. Another straight down the middle matchup as far as I'm concerned. I think it's really fun too. It reminds me kind of like of Tusk, where each character has an answer for something that can also be baited out. So it's just, you know, very back and forth. Very neutral heavy too. I think there's a lot of nooch in this matchup. So if you like grounded footsies, I think that Mira and Eyedol actually kind of represent it pretty well. You know, you think there would be a lot of like air dashing and then him DPing and then going into mage and calling a lot of lightning, but the normals in this matchup are used pretty frequently. I find myself using standing medium kick, standing medium punch. Crouching Fierce is a surprisingly pretty good grounded poke, fast, and it has a pretty far horizontal hitbox. I think that matchup is pretty even. I like fighting Eyedol with Mira. I think she has the upper hand against Kilgore too, for the same reasons as Fulgore. He has an easier time zoning her compared to Fulgore. Fulgore doesn't keep her out as well, in my opinion, but I think she also rushes Kilgore down better. I think his DP is a lot easier to take advantage of, and I think she just pressures him better in general. I've always liked this matchup. I've played it a ton with Sonic Dolphin, and as far as I'm concerned, it's very difficult for Kilgore to keep Mira where he wants her, and she's just all over the screen. This is a matchup where you can kind of play nutty and get away with it. Like, he has to play perfectly to even get her where he wants her to be, and it's just not easy. It's not easy at all. I think it takes a very strong Kilgore to deal with this matchup well, and I don't think it's easy for him. I think Mira wins. Got some more fun stuff here. Shin Hisako. I think this matchup is very easy, and it all comes down to bats and mobility. This is a pretty standard thing you'll see in this category right here. She doesn't really care about her mix because Mist is really good, and Shin Hisako can have a hard time anti-airing her, so she never has to really care about the Shin Hisako blunder that we all know and love and hate. So it's kind of whatever. I think this matchup is fine for Mira. It's better than fine. Fine is an understatement. I think it's very good. I don't really fear Shin Hisako as Mira. I hate Shin Hisako as a character, so I'm very grateful that I play Fulgore and Mira, who both have a pretty good time against her. Bats lock down Shin very well. She has a hard time using her DP as an anti-air in this matchup, and Mira can safe jump it in a lot of ways. The damage difference is a big factor in this matchup too, because Shin has pretty moderate damage, very comparable to like Omen or maybe even like Cinder. But she, you know, when she's fighting against Mira, Mira has crazy damage output. So the high risk, high reward style that you would think is usually high risk, high reward, it's actually pretty low risk in this matchup because you're just doing so much more damage than her in most combo situations. So it's just, there's not a lot of advantages here for Shin Hisako. She has a pretty hard time fighting Mira, in my opinion. And the last character here is Eyedol. Honestly, very easy. I think this matchup is really good for Mira. I think that being able to avoid the blender in the same way as Shin Hisako, you know, you don't ever have to deal with the crazy 50-50s from Eyedol, which is his biggest strength, right? He forces characters to block, and he has to lose a lot of her, a lot of mix-ups against her because he's trying to lock her down with safer stuff like jab, you know, instead of just bird, slide, low, overhead arrow. Like, he doesn't get to do a lot of that stuff against her. Also, she wins the neutral very well. Bats are kind of annoying for Eyedol, especially on knockdown. Like, he just has no wake-up options at all, so she can just completely smother this character. It's very similar to like locking down Thunder, but not nearly as scary. I think Thunder can at least like mix if he's given the opportunity. Eyedol doesn't really get that opportunity. I think this matchup's pretty easy overall, and she doesn't have to worry about the arrows in neutral either because she could just, you know, miss through them. If he's holding an arrow, you just dash at him, and you can see him holding the arrow. He can't, you know, get out of that. You know, he's got to shoot it. And then you just dash at him, you miss to the other side, and what's he going to do? He's committed to the arrow, so it's just like, whatever. Mira really doesn't care about Eagle at all. I think that matchup is very easy. And that's my tier list. That's my matchup chart for Mira. A lot of winning matchups, a lot of losing matchups. She's somewhere right in the middle of the pack. I think that people downplayed this character for a long time and said she's really bad. I also think that some people think that she's like top 5, and I don't think that's true either. I think she's somewhere right in the middle. She has the best damage output in the game, but she has some characters that really don't ever have to worry about it because they're just never taking damage from her, because her neutral sometimes gets outclassed by characters that have air superiority or even a better ground game. However, there are a lot of characters that struggle with fighting her because her ground game is either usually better than hers, or she doesn't have to deal with their pressure because she uses Mist really well against them, or she just wins because she's the best character ever. I love Mira. Thank you guys for watching. See ya.